Our show is about bringing the best practices in education to inspire, connect, and empower all educators by providing practical tips that can be used in the everyday school setting.
Hello and welcome to Coach Me If You Can. I am your host, Kristie Wurglitz, and I have Beth Mand here with me today. And we're going to speak with our guest star, Elena Aguilar. This is my second year as an NSSEO district coach. Prior to this, I worked in the field of special education. This is my 9th year in special education.
And hi, I'm Beth Mand. I'm another one of the NSSEO coaches. I've been an NSSEO district coach for the past 4 years, and I've been in the field of education since 2005, working mainly as a special education teacher.
Elena is a writer, speaker, consultant, trainer, leader, teacher, coach, and podcaster. So basically, you're everything. She is a best-selling author and has written 6 highly acclaimed books. Some of my favorites include Onward and The Art of Coaching.
I love The Art of Coaching.
Me too.
So great. Elena is the founder and president of Bright Morning Consulting, an organization committed to helping individuals and organizations create the conditions for transformation. She has worked across the United States and internationally in the field of adult learning. Her 25 years in the education field led her to the topic of emotional resilience.
Hi, Elena. Thanks so much for joining us today on the Coach Me If You Can podcast. We cannot explain how excited we are. I'm like kind of fangirling over here. Thank you so much for joining us. Do you mind telling us a little bit more about yourself and what inspired you to become an author?
Sure, you're welcome. So I worked in public schools in California for 20 years. 19 of those in the Oakland Unified School District in Oakland, California, which is in the Bay Area. And I love teaching. I am a teacher at heart. I will always be a teacher. In the sort of second half of my time in Oakland, I began coaching, primarily coaching new teachers. And as I became a more experienced coach, there were things that I learned that I thought, I wish I had known this when I first started. And when I first started coaching, this was in 2003, there were very few people talking about coaching, writing about coaching, providing training about coaching, really, really very, very few. I could find very little. And so as I gained more skill and experience just through my own messy trial and effort, I just kept feeling like, oh, I wish I'd had this in the beginning. I wish I'd had. So I have long been a writer, and then in 2012, I thought, I've learned a lot about coaching, and I am going to create my own professional development project for the next year. And I want to write a book about coaching because that's how I can really more deeply understand what I have learned about coaching. So initially, The Art of Coaching, I thought about as like, this is my PD project. I'm going to give myself a learning experience. And I'd been doing some writing for Edutopia and Teacher Weekly. And I was like, maybe I can put together a book on coaching. And so that's really where it came from, was a desire to give myself the resource I wish I had had as a beginning coach. And then obviously the next level implication was, and I think this is what new coaches need, and even experienced coaches as well. So that was sort of how I got into that.
So like all that personal experience just went into that book. And I think it really shows through as a beginning coach ourselves. Reading that book was really powerful for us and giving us some really good insight into some different ways we can approach things.
Yeah.
So what is one thing you hope our listeners will get out of today?
I hope listeners will see themselves still as learners and will hear my learning journey, and really that I am still in it with everyone. And I commit a lot to my own learning process. And that's what I hope folks will remember, that you are all learners too. And in spite of everything going on in your schools, your districts, your communities, the world, you still have your ability to learn within your sphere of influence or even control. Like that is something you still control, is that you can guide and direct your learning. You can still learn even in the most difficult of times. And that's really at the core of who I am and everything I've done is my own learning journey.
I love that. So learning's never finished. We're always continuously learning in the midst of anything that's going on and just throughout our years. That's great.
And that's and it feels like that's a cliche, right? It's like we want to raise lifelong learners and we are all committed learners. But I feel like that doesn't live in practice a lot. It doesn't actually materialize into things that we do and even into our mental models and our attitudes. And one of the most powerful resilience building strategies, at least for me and for many folks that I've worked with and coached and heard from, is the habit of being a learner and remembering that in any situation, I mean, in really difficult situations, we can still learn from those. We also need to honor the feelings and the emotions that come up. I'm not saying like you're in the midst of a horrible crisis and you need to say to yourself, what can I learn? What can I learn? That'll come at some point, but we can always learn. Can I tell you a little personal anecdote?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So we are recording this on January 11th, and today's the anniversary of my mom's death. She died 22 years ago. And so it is inevitable that on this day, I spend a lot of time thinking about her. I experience lots of waves of sadness. I mean, sometimes like the way grief works, sometimes it is this day and sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's the out of the blue, even 22 years later. But one thing I was thinking about today, and that I often think about, how my mom was my best friend. She was everything. She was my biggest supporter. I miss her with a deep ache all the time. And the person I am since she passed is a different person. And in part, I have to say it's because of what I've learned about resilience and community and emotions and memory and grief. And so I would just want to say, for the record, I would happily trade all my learnings to have my mom back. I'm not glorifying the lessons. And that's like the key word for me. And I have learned so much. And I am the person I am today, and the person I am as a coach and as a leader, as a writer, is deeply informed by what I learned from her passing. And so that's just on my mind. It's like, again, I'd be happy to trade all the learnings to have my mom. And I have learned so much in the last 22 years about being a human being and leading and connecting with other people and having meaningful conversations and making our lives count, making every day count.
Well, thank you for being so vulnerable and sharing that with us. So next, I wanted to talk a little bit about Onward. So earlier I had mentioned that Onward is one of my absolute favorite books that you have written. And for those of our listeners who don't know what Onward is, it's a really great resource that helps our educators kind of navigate that stress, cultivate resilience, and also helps prevent burnout within the education field, which is great, especially in a time like this. Our district has done a lot of work around Onward. We've done it within our mentor program for some of our newer teachers and newer staff members. We've also created a book club, and I've got it right here with me with all my notes in it. We've created a book club around Onward that we're doing this year, and it's just been absolutely wonderful. So my question for you is, how do you encourage educators to continue to cultivate that resilience through a pandemic? And are there any habits that you would add in other than your initial 12 habits that you wrote in the book, given the circumstances that we're facing within the pandemic?
Well, I think your first question, how would I encourage educators to cultivate resilience through a pandemic, is we have to. We absolutely have to. It's not even, and I'm finding that so many educators want to and recognize the need. And perhaps maybe I can pause and just define resilience, because resilience is really the emotional, physical, cognitive, and maybe even like spiritual energy that we have to deal with adversity or challenge. It's how we deal with adversity so that we grow and learn and bounce back after the adversity, or even bounce forward, so that the adversity, the struggles, the challenges lead us to expansion, fulfillment, more joy, more connection, more meaning. And so more than ever right now, we can benefit from cultivating our resilience. I mean, it's just resilience is the ability to thrive and not just survive. And there's no point in just trying to scrap our way through and survive this pandemic. We can learn, we can grow, we can connect more deeply. We might be able to reflect on school and schooling and how we work. And, there's so much. I talk to so many people these days who are, and this has been really for a year and a half, contemplating leaving their jobs, changing careers, changing positions. I see that as a positive, as people are really reflecting on what they're doing with their lives. There is an opportunity to cultivate resilience in that reflection. So how can we not? In terms of the habits, I wrote that book in 2017. Obviously, with no idea of where we were going.
Right.
And I have to say, in 2020, I kept going back to Onward myself and doing activities in the workbook and reminding myself, like, Elena, you know something about resilience. You can draw on these strategies. And so I would not add any habits. I feel like those are the ones. And I'll loop back to like what I learned from my mom's death. So much of Onward is informed by that experience. And so what I teach in my workshops, what I write about is informed by lived personal experience as well as professional. I feel like that's a ridiculous distinction we made. Like we have our personal lives, our professional lives, as if they are separate. They're not. One can inform the other they're both mutual benefits. So those are the habits. I use them a lot.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. I love the thrive, not just survive. And we can use that, especially in a time like this where we are going through such a hard time.
And continuing that same vein with kind of what's going on in our schools and what we're facing as coaches is, we're going in and we're seeing that the demands of school are changing. And specifically right now with the high teacher absences and everyone needing to fill in wherever in the school is needed, what is the best pathway through your eyes to keep the importance of coaching front and center when the bandwidth in schools is so low?
For me, in this question, the place to start is, how do you think about coaching? What is coaching? Because I don't think there's ever been a more important or necessary time for folks to be engaging in coaching. If you define coaching as a vehicle for learning, and if you understand that learning can be and needs to be holistic in the sense that learning needs to address both skill and knowledge about teaching and learning, as well as, in this case, the teachers or educators' ability to engage in a healthy way with their emotions. If emotions and coaching emotions are considered part of coaching, part of instructional coaching, part of what educators experience, then there's never been a more important time for coaches to have these skills and to know, what does it mean? So when I use the phrase a lot, coaching emotions. So what does that mean and how do we do it? And there's never been a more important time, because educators will always experience a lot of emotions, because we are human beings and human beings have emotions. And because educators work with young people who also have a lot of emotions and express them in often more free and open and constant ways. And so there's just a lot of emotions for human beings and for teachers. And so I have always talked about and believed that coaches need to address emotions, but there's never been a more important time, because teachers are really, it just feels like every week is harder and harder and harder, literally every week. And they're exhausted. And so how can we not be coaching around emotions and coaching right now?
So making sure that we're not only coaching that learning and instruction piece, but helping to coach those emotions and that resilience piece to support our teachers to help make it through this really tough time.
Yeah. And that's why I started off by saying like this, in some ways, your question is contingent upon a definition of what is coaching. Because I know in a lot of places, coaching is like, we sit down, we look at your lesson plans, and we talk about the formative assessment you use, and we analyze your data. We talk about, that's not how I define coaching. And so that's why often when I'm doing work with coaches or when I'm consulting with districts and they start talking about coaching, I say, wait a minute, let's back up. How are you defining coaching? How is coaching defined in your school, your district? And then let's talk about the impact that's having and where it's accomplishing what it's intending to accomplish and where it's not. So we have to kind of back up and define that.
Yeah. So really making sure that we're going back and having that maybe a broader conversation around what coaching is so that the coaches have a broader range of how to support their teams.
Yeah. And to do that, you have to get probably administrators or supervisors or whoever directs the coaching program on board with that approach. And so, I've trained lots of coaches or folks come to my workshops who say, I love this, but my district says here in our district, coaching is talk about formative assessment, look at data, use this form, check this box, turn in this. And so what do I do when I sit down to talk to a teacher about all of this? And she just starts sobbing and saying, I can't do this anymore. I can't do this. Right. So then coaches are sort of stuck in the middle between, wait, my boss is expecting me to turn in this document saying we talked about X, Y, and Z. And in front of me, there's a human being who is sobbing and saying she doesn't know how she's going to make it through. What do I do as a coach? So sometimes, we have to get that. We have to get the systems, the structures, the framework or program aligned with the reality.
Well, and I think that aligns right with right now, all the additional supports we're putting in place for children and our students with social emotional learning and making sure that they're getting what they need emotionally and that it's a safe place, and to make sure that we are in turn doing that for the adults in the building as well.
Yeah. And there's a worthwhile, beautiful commitment to social emotional learning for kids. And it's really taking a while for that to reach the adults who serve them. That kind of commitment and that acknowledgement that, oh, our teachers need this too. Our principals do too. So the superintendent, so does the central office folks, everybody needs to learn what it means to explore and experience emotions and express them in a way that is conducive and benefits everyone.
Beth and I, since we're both coaches, we're a part of the professional learning department. And with that said, we do give a lot of different PD to not only members within our district, but also members, also to people that are in our member districts. So we know that you have a new book coming out, which we are so excited about. It's called the PD book, 7 Habits That Transform PD. We're wondering if you could give us a sneak peek about what are some things we can expect to learn coming up in your book. And we know you can't give away a whole lot, but.
Sure. I love this question. So can I ask both of you a question?
Yeah.
What would you say is most challenging for you about doing PD?
I think since we get asked to do PD by typically our member districts will come in and ask us to do something, is making sure that our outcomes align with what the district outcomes are and that we're on the same page of what we want everyone walking away with at the end.
I think in years past too, it's been always hard finding different strategies and things to do during our PD that actually cultivate engagement and that participants can actually walk away with and really learn and gain from our PDs. One thing that we have just been doing this year and last year is just going through some of the adaptive school strategies. Have you heard of the adaptive schools? So that's something that we started utilizing that I think's been extremely helpful, but just making sure that we're not just creating a PD to create a PD, but that our participants are actually getting something out of that and walking away with it and being able to start doing whatever it is that we're teaching within that PD. And it's not just something that they're just going to go to, but that it really is meaningful for them.
And I don't know that they're like the hardest in terms of like the most challenging, but I think that's definitely where we spend the most amount of time in developing PD is around our learning outcomes and making sure that our participants are going to walk away with something and that it was beneficial for them.
Thank you. I love that. Okay. So Now I'm going to tell you about the book, and I'll tell you which chapters or which habits you will find the most use for what you just named as being, this area that you spend a lot of time thinking about, which is great. The book that I co-wrote with my teammate, Lori Cohen, is focused on the 7 habits that you can learn and implement that might make your PD not only much more impactful, but also feel better for everyone. And so the thing that we talked about a lot was, what if PD could be more like a party? What if it could be fun? And neither of us are like party people. Let me just say that. Like, we're both I'm super introverted. She's not. But like, I invite me to a party and I'll probably get sick and not go. And so I just want to say that, like, the metaphor is about the energy of a social gathering or gathering that leaves you feeling sort of electric and connected to other people, and that it was fun. And I feel like so much PD is draining, or has been, at least in my experience that I have attended, or has been tense, or has been just not helpful, not useful. I'll tell you just a little bit about the 7 habits. The first habit, the first chapter, is on determining purpose. And that is part of what both of you talked about. How do you align purpose? How do you figure out what matters most? How do you make the learning matter? And so that's where we start, because it has to matter. It has to be what people need, and it has to align to the bigger picture goals or mission or vision. The second chapter, the second habit, is on engaging emotions. And that includes how you deal as a PD provider or facilitator with your own occasional grumpiness or your pet peeves or your triggers. It has to do with how you create psychological safety for a group. A lot of the sticky moments that we experience as facilitators come up around this general, like, emotions, your own and those of others. And then the next habit is called navigate power. And that is a complex one, but it is one that I actually think that we deal with constantly. And so even that when we are trying to align outcomes and make sure that they match up to a district or something, that's part of navigating power. And so there's a lot to explore about how do we understand power? How do we respond to it? That's where we talk about resistance, which is something that a lot of PD providers struggle with. The people that they think, the learners who they think, well, they're resistant. What do I do about a resistant so-and-so? Then the next habit is anchor in adult learning. And so that's where we spend a little bit of time talking about adult learning theory. And throughout the book, we're also incorporating how to do professional development in the virtual world, how to do online PD, Zoom PD. Then the next chapter, the next habit, is design intentionally. And so lots of support for how to design PD sessions. And then the next habit is attend to the details. And I think this is also where you would both get a lot of support for how do you create really meaningful agendas and learning experiences that people can use immediately, that are purposeful, that are a fit for what they need. And then finally, the 7th habit is facilitate adaptively. And that chapter is about what do you do when, you've got these plans and then something happens, right? There are, let's say, detours or other things happen. And so how do you respond in those moments? So those are the 7 habits. Our commitment is to making PD purposeful, powerful, something that impacts students and impacts student learning, and that feels better to everyone involved, maybe even feels a little bit more like a party.
I love that. I love how you talk about the social gathering and being connected to other people. I just finished reading Brene Brown's book, The Loss of the Heart. I know that you guys both reference each other in both of your books, so it's kind of funny to see that. But she talks a lot too about being connected with people and the importance of that. So I love that you bring that into your PD book too. And I love that you talk about not just impacting the adults that we're teaching or training, but then that goes back into the classroom and ultimately impacts student learning, which is really our main priority, right? Is that we want whatever we're teaching the adults or the staff to bring that back into their classroom and to see some kind of impact within their classroom and their students. So that's awesome. We're really excited to read that and dive into that.
Yay,
but we have to wait till May. What the heck?
I know. But I do want to tell everybody, I'm going to take this advantage, this opportunity to say, like, please pre-order. It makes us such a huge deal for authors. It really helps us get the word out. Unfortunately, it's like one of these games that authors have to play. So the more pre-orders we get, the better. And we'll be having some different free open sort of webinars and things about the book as we get closer. So folks should stay tuned for that.
Yeah, that sounds great. We definitely will.
Yeah. So many insights today. Thank you so much for sharing all this wealth of information. I think some of my biggest takeaways from this conversation is really to rethink that coaching role and how can you coach that whole person, and maybe do some of your own professional learning and that same thing of lifelong learning of what skills and strategies do I need to learn in order to help other people continue to cultivate their own resilience.
Yeah.
Kristie?
Yeah, very similar to you, Beth. The two phrases that you said today that just stick in my brain are that coaching needs to be that vehicle for learning. So really defining what coaching is and what that looks like and making sure that everyone is a part of that. So it's not just the coaches and the teachers, but really bringing in the administrators and those school leaders as well. And then I also loved to thrive, not survive. And I just feel like that really sticks with me because of the time that we're in right now. And just a lot of people, I think, are in that survival mode, but we have to almost remember that this is a time where we can thrive, even though it is kind of a crazy time. So I love that.
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah. So before we get into our rapid fire questions next, our last bigger question for you is, what is something that empowers, inspires, or connects you?
So I'll just start, like, what empowers me. I just released a podcast episode on my podcast is the Bright Morning Podcast, I think a week ago, or maybe it was this week, about my morning routines and how what I do immediately after I wake up sets me up for the whole day. And one of those morning routines is meditation. And I use this meditation app and it tells me how many consecutive days I've been doing it. And today it's at 108 consecutive days, which I was like, woohoo, This is good. These are like real numbers, and so that's not missing a single day. And so I start with meditation and then I do this writing practice where basically I write for like 20 minutes without stopping. And I don't share it with anybody. I don't reread it. It's just, in some ways, I feel like it's me meeting with myself as my own coach or my best self, but it's like where I process things. And so those are part of my morning routines. And I think what I'm realizing, because now it's been 108 days, I started in late September, is that doing it every day, and now it's this really ingrained and powerful habit. My whole day feels so much better, clearer, stronger, grounded, anchored. Like I just feel no matter what happens, this is like my foundation. And so your question, like what empowers me, I guess it like both empowers and inspires me, but the empowerment comes from that time I take in the morning. It's really my space to ground and anchor in who I am, what I'm doing, and the kind of life I want to live.
Yeah, that's great. You just take that time for yourself every morning and it just becomes a part of your day and just kind of sets you up for positive intent for the rest of your day.
That would be a goal.
Yeah.
I would like to do that.
Yeah, that sounds great.
So for our last bit of the segment, we have rapid fire questions for you. So we're going to give you the question and you're just going to share the first thing that pops in your head. What is something new that you have recently learned?
Something new I've recently learned. There's lots of different red lipstick that I like. And I'm trying to wear red lipstick every day because I'm trying to have more fun. And so, but I keep finding more and more red lipstick that I like. I'm like, there's so many.
I love that. That's fun. Beth's got her lipstick on today too. So, who was your favorite teacher growing up?
My mom. I did not have positive experiences in school with teachers. I had awful experiences for years and years and years. But my mom, who actually was a teacher, she was an ESL teacher, English as a second language, as it was called back then. She really was my teacher in so many ways. And that's why my first book, The Art of Coaching, is dedicated to her as I think I wrote my first and finest coach. And she really was.
Oh, I love that.
What book are you currently reading?
I am slowly reading a book called Creative Acts for Curious People. It's how to think, create, and lead in unconventional ways. And it is the main editor is Sarah Stein Greenberg. And it's the kind of thing that you want to read really slowly because there's so many inspiring ideas in there. I really recommend it for all teachers, all coaches, educators. It's energizing and inspiring and sparks lots of ideas.
We're going to have to look that one up. Best advice you have for an educator?
Know yourself and stay connected to your why, your purpose, your reason for being alive, and make every day count. You can. That is within your influence, your power.
You just gave me the goosebumps, Elena.
So for our audience, how can they find you? And how can some of our listeners find out or order your books or podcasts? Where do we find all that great information?
Yeah. Well, I'm hoping you can share some of this in whatever format people can click on, show notes or whatever you use. You can find my books in all the places that books are sold. My podcast is the Bright Morning Podcast, and that is also in all the places that podcasts are found. I am also on social media. On the place that I'm most active on is probably Twitter and Instagram. On Instagram, I have 2 accounts. There's my Bright Morning Team account, and then I have a personal account where I share more personal things. And but I'm also in LinkedIn, and we don't use Facebook a whole lot, but we are there a little bit. So the socials. Oh, and my website, which is brightmorningteam.com.
We'll definitely make sure to put those in our show notes.
Yes. Thank you so much, Elena, for joining us today.
We really appreciate you taking the time. And I know all of our listeners are going to be super excited to hear this too. So thank you so much.
You're so welcome. It was really an enjoyable conversation.
Thank you.